My name is Michael. For the past few months, my life has been consumed by conversations with one man. He's a whistleblower, and he claims that home appraisers are systematically inflating property values to drive up taxes. What he's uncovered is nothing short of a ticking time bomb set to go off in the heart of the American economy. Look at the numbers, he told me, his voice intense. From 2018 to 2019 alone, we saw a 30% jump in property values. Based on what? Where was the inflation to justify that? It was only 2.7%. For 5 consecutive years, we've witnessed a compound cumulative fraud based on the overvaluation of real estate. The sheer scale is hard to comprehend. He estimates that the fraudulent portion of the face value of the school bonds issued against these properties is somewhere around $5.1 trillion, and he insists that's a conservative figure. People have to go to jail for this, he said, slamming his fist lightly on the table. I had to ask, are you saying this is bigger than the 2008 crisis? He looked at me without a hint of doubt.
Michael, he said, 2008 will literally seem like a walk in Central Park in comparison. It'll be a non-existent blip on the radar. He's convinced we're on the edge of a financial abyss. His goal now, he explained, is to contain the damage, to push for what he calls a controlled demolition of this corrupt system. Because if we let this thing collapse on its own, he warned, his voice dropping, heaven help all of us. He told me this whole investigation started for him way back in 2016, but the information he's uncovered in just the last week has revealed a spiderweb of deceit so vast and intricate, it's almost unbelievable in its scope and complexity. This isn't just some theory he's shouting into the void. He's taken this fight to the highest levels, and he's not backing down. He's already presented his extensive findings to the Department of Justice. An attorney from the SEC actually reached out to his team several weeks ago, so they're on it. And a crucial meeting with the Washington, D.C. division is in the works.
As if that weren't enough, he also has a meeting scheduled within the next 10 days with the FBI in Houston. And the final nail in the coffin? They're likely filing with the U.S. Postal Service for mail fraud. He explained the gravity of that. Every single fraudulent tax bill sent through the mail could represent a $2,000 fine and 4 years in jail per envelope. There's a lot in motion here, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Let me give you some background on the man who uncovered this. I'll call him John. He's not just some armchair analyst, he's the real deal. John has been a real estate developer for over 35 years, with a formidable background in statistical probability and quantitative finance. He's not just a numbers guy, though. I'm the guy on site during construction, he told me, but I'm also the one behind the spreadsheets, pushing the buttons. He understands how the thousands of moving parts in development work, and that unique perspective is what helped him piece this all together.
He started noticing discrepancies back in 2016, but it was in 2017 when he and his accountant began digging deep into the certified tax rolls that the problem became glaringly evident. They've been filing lawsuits fighting this system every single year since. From a constitutional perspective, what he found is absolutely shocking. There are so many violations of the U.S. Constitution, he explained. The First, Fifth, and 14th Amendments are all being trampled, especially concerning due process. He pointed out that the 16th Amendment is crystal clear. You can only tax an income, not an unrealized gain.
But in the appraisal world, he continued, they use what's called market value, which is, by its very definition, an unrealized gain. The states have created a system that is in complete and utter violation of the U.S. Constitution, period, end of story. And the violations don't stop at the federal level. It gets even worse at the state level, he said. In Texas, for example, the state constitution requires property valuations to be uniform and equal. This means if you have two similar properties, both worth $1 million, you can't just decide to appraise one at $2 million.
The law explicitly states the property must be valued at the lower equal value. They've completely ignored that. Then there's the Texas Property Tax Code, which mandates strict adherence to the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or USPAP. This isn't just some local Texas standard, it's the same professional framework used across the U.S. and even in Canada. The mountain of evidence I've collected, he said with frustration, proves irrefutably that they do not adhere to USPAP. You might as well take the document and light it on fire. He then revealed one of the secret tools they use. They have these things called property cards, he said, leaning in. And just a few weeks ago, I found out that appraisers can go in and manipulate the effective age of a property on these cards. By simply lying about the effective age, they can artificially inflate the value of a home or building. The average homeowner, whether it's a family or a commercial property owner, has absolutely no idea this is happening behind the scenes. But I have the evidence, he assured me.
So, when people ask him if they should even be paying property taxes, his answer is blunt and unwavering. By law, this entire system should never have existed. So, who started this? I asked. Who saw this loophole and decided to exploit it on such a massive scale? He paused for a moment, then referenced a quote from Thomas Paine from 250 years ago. The greatest tyrannies are always perpetrated in the name of the noblest causes. That's exactly what happened here. It sounded like a good idea on the surface, a noble cause where everyone pitches in through a real estate tax to support local schools and municipalities. But what started as an honorable thought has morphed into a nationwide crisis of confidence. He laid out the math. School districts are responsible for, on average, a staggering 83% of all the bonds raised off these fraudulently inflated property taxes. I wanted to understand the school board's role in this, because it feels like a master illusion. They convince hard-working families that they're paying higher property taxes because the schools in their district are phenomenal and worth the investment. He told me it's all a carefully crafted piece of propaganda. It simply isn't true, he stated flatly. He then proved it to me with a stunning, undeniable fact. School districts across the country are raising new bonds today for the sole purpose of paying off the interest on bonds that were issued 10 years ago. That is the literal definition of a Ponzi scheme, he declared. On top of that, they shamelessly use the "we're doing this for the children" line, which he finds deeply offensive. In Texas alone, he said, a single entity feeds over 4 million people a year. If you repealed the property tax, there would be more than enough excess money to ensure those 4 million people, including their children, wouldn't have to rely on the government for food. It's pure, unadulterated propaganda.
But are these taxes even being used for their stated purpose, like building new schools? I pressed. He shook his head. No, not really. That's the story they sell you. They might issue a bond and build a new school, but that's not the whole picture. It's just the cover story. For example, he explained, let's say a new school costs $70 million.
They'll turn around and tell the public they need $300 million. He then gave me some staggering real-world numbers. In Salina, Texas, they just approved a $2.3 billion bond for a town with only 8,300 citizens. In Godley, Texas, the outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt amounts to $120,000 per household, in a town where the average house is worth only $160,000. In Argyle, Texas, it's an unbelievable $343,000 in debt, stacked against an average home value of $450,000. The core of the problem is that 50, 60, even 80% of the current market value of a house is now phantom value, created out of thin air by this fraudulent tax system. There is no math on this planet that can pay this off, he insisted. He pointed out that the average American household already carries about $6,700 in credit card debt, which means people are living on credit just to get by. How are you going to generate the money to pay for these bonds when the average family is already underwater? It's impossible. The inevitable question, then, is who pays the price when these repayments can never be met?
That's precisely why he's pushing so hard with the SEC, the FBI, and the DOJ. He calls his proposed solution a controlled demolition, hoping the system can be dismantled carefully instead of just blowing up in everyone's faces. We are right back in 2007, he said with certainty. There is zero doubt about that. This is like the movie Margin Call, except what's happening now is much, much worse. This crisis touches everything, far beyond just mortgages. He calculates that the outstanding bonds held by financial institutions are actually worth maybe 40 cents on the dollar less than their face value because of this pervasive fraud. And it's a devious double dip. The school districts get money directly from homeowners through these inflated property taxes, and then they turn around and hold their hands out for another $165 billion from the federal government, funneled through the state's general fund.
It's a scam of biblical proportions, he said, and it's going to end in a total crisis of confidence. He has one simple, direct question for every governor in the country. How is your state going to cover the outstanding fraudulent school district bonds? This isn't just a Texas problem, he was adamant about that. It's a nationwide epidemic, and no state escapes this in one form or another. Some are just run by bigger criminals than others, he said grimly. He's found that the chief appraisers and school superintendents not only commit accounting and bond fraud, but they actually attend seminars to learn new techniques from each other. They are literally teaching each other how to be better criminals. The division of responsibility is an interesting, albeit infuriating puzzle. It starts with the school districts claiming they need more money. The superintendent then commits accounting fraud by lying to the state controller about their budget needs. They pass this predetermined fraudulent number to the chief appraisers, who are, in fact, controlled and owned by the school districts themselves. It's a closed loop of lawbreakers, a perfect circle of corruption, and they can't claim ignorance. The evidence is out there, and it's irrefutable. He cited federal law, Chapter 42, Section 1986, which states that if you know a law is being broken and you have the power to stop it but choose to do nothing, you are just as guilty in the eyes of the law. To make it easy for law enforcement, he's created a detailed spreadsheet for the FBI that lays everything out: who did it, how it was done, and what the devastating ramifications are, complete with links to the source evidence for each and every claim. He's hiding nothing. He wants this out in the open to force a solution. His proposal is remarkably simple. Repeal the real estate tax entirely and replace it with a uniform state sales tax. This would immediately get the government out of the business of fraudulent property valuations and begin to stabilize the entire system for homeowners. I had to ask him if he thought anyone at the federal level, perhaps at the Federal Reserve, was aware of this. He believes it's a dangerous combination of willful ignorance and people in power simply not paying attention. He's been hammering on this issue for years, and the evidence just keeps mounting. Every single day, his team gets emails from concerned citizens across the country, adding more fuel to the fire. He now believes the only way to force real action is to prosecute under U.S. Postal Service mail fraud statutes. People have to go to jail for this, he repeated, his conviction unwavering. He told me about the moment he realized the true scale of the crisis. When he first ran the numbers on the bond situation last October, he thought he had to be wrong. My stomach was in knots, he admitted. He sent his spreadsheet to a well-known and respected colleague in the appraisal world in California. The colleague's response was a single expletive, followed by, "I'll call you in 5 minutes." John knew then that he was right. Their combined analysis showed that once a school district is officially labeled with fraud, the economic value of their bonds plummets to between 13 and 30 cents on the dollar. The pendulum swings so far that the credibility of the entire state is put at risk, which in turn puts the financial stability of the entire United States in harm's way. This is a compound cumulative fraud. It's not just a one-time overassessment that can be corrected. He walked me through it. From 2017 to 2018, values jumped 15% when inflation was only 1.7%. The next year, a 30% jump when inflation was 2.7%. For 5 straight years, they compounded this fraudulent overvaluation, using the stolen tax dollars to cover the ever-growing interest on fraudulent bonds that have been building for generations. They never paid off the original bonds. They just rolled them up with new interest, kicking the can down a dead-end road. So, could the Fed step in and be the buyer of last resort? I wondered aloud. He doesn't think so, not for something this rotten. Imagine a governor walking into Jerome Powell's office and asking the Fed to print money to rescue their state from a crisis they themselves created, he scoffed. The only solution from the Fed would be to print trillions of dollars, which would send us straight into a Weimar Republic scenario and officially sanction the worst kind of moral hazard. You cannot rescue this, he said firmly. The state of Texas has already sanctioned it, and look how bad it's gotten. $660 billion in fraudulent debt. In a town like Godley, Texas, the fraudulent bond debt acts as a second mortgage on every single home. Next year, with more compounded interest, it'll be a third mortgage. The town is financially in worse condition than Detroit was at its lowest point. As an attorney, he's working with grimly put it, Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together again. The only way to restore the system is to get these fraudulent taxes off the backs of homeowners and restore their balance sheets. No one in America ever signed a document agreeing to go bankrupt for the sake of their local school district. Yet, right now, 42 million households are in harm's way of bankruptcy or losing the roof over their heads. That's nearly 38% of the entire household population.
You cannot get blood from a stone, he said. The money to pay these bonds simply doesn't exist. If there's no rescue, we're talking about a catastrophic default. The problem is, the bonds themselves aren't even fully trackable. Under federal law, banks are required to hold 60% of their reserves in bonds. But which bonds? His team tried to track the CUSIP numbers, the unique identifiers for these bonds, through Freedom of Information Act requests, but they were stonewalled at every turn. In one incredible instance, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, personally ordered a school district to turn over the numbers, and the district essentially told him to get lost. If you can't track the bonds without federal subpoena power, how can you possibly know which banks are sitting on this ticking time bomb? This is why he says 2008 will look like a non-existent blip on the historical radar. This crisis isn't quantifiable like the subprime mortgage crisis was. The interest clock is ticking on these bonds, and his $5.1 trillion estimate is conservative because it doesn't include all the off-balance sheet financing, like shady energy agreements that school districts use to hide their debt. And it gets worse.
When you factor in the derivatives that Wall Street firms created to hedge against these bonds, he says the real number could be as high as $17 trillion. And in some cases, his investigation has found hidden investment pools, secret slush funds that the public has no idea even exist. It's clear that many people are getting obscenely wealthy off this nationwide Ponzi scheme. He faces incredible opposition from powerful interests, but he believes the math is his ultimate weapon. It's undeniable. No one, not even state government officials, has been able to answer his one simple question. How are you going to pay for this? They can't answer it because there is no answer. So the next terrifying question is, what happens when it all comes crashing down? His entire effort, his life's work at this point, is to make sure that crash is a controlled demolition. I asked him about Canada, as he's originally from there. He told me that on a per-person basis, Canada is in even worse shape than the U.S. He left his home country in 1990 precisely because of these kinds of socialist policies that inevitably lead to ruin. His entire effort, his life's work at this point, is to make sure that crash is a controlled demolition. I asked him about Canada, as he's originally from there. He told me that on a per-person basis, Canada is in even worse shape than the U.S. He left his home country in 1990 precisely because of these kinds of socialist policies that inevitably lead to ruin.
The only thing that truly matters for a homeowner, he explained, is the median household income. If that income cannot cover the debt that has been fraudulently loaded onto their property, that's the definition of bankruptcy. The money simply isn't there. He believes Canadians are in a worse position because the compound cumulative effect of the fraud is even greater than in the United States, and they lack the underlying economic engine to potentially absorb some of the shock. The system is bankrupt today, right now. Tomorrow it will be bankrupt raised to an exponent. That's the stark reality. The key is to avoid a catastrophic liquidity or credit crisis while this mess is being unwound. They could theoretically contain it by wiping out the $5.1 trillion in fraudulent bonds, forcing the investors and underwriters who knowingly participated in the fraud to take the loss.
But even that massive step doesn't account for all the off-balance sheet financing or the massive devaluation of bonds currently held by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The value of the houses they guaranteed was never real. It was a fraud from the very start. So what should people do to protect themselves? For those who haven't bought their first home, his advice is simple. Rent and be patient. Prices are already starting to fall. He told me about a house in Houston that dropped from $126 a square foot to $92 a square foot in just 7 months. Patience will be rewarded. For those with cash, he questions why anyone would leave significant amounts sitting in a bank right now. There are 600 out of 4,700 banks in the U.S. that may not exist very shortly, he warned. He suggests that any cash beyond a 3-month emergency fund should be in precious metals, like gold, or in tangible, cash-flowing assets with no debt. Leaving it in the bank is just watching it disintegrate in real time. He wanted me to understand that he's not doing this for himself. The lawsuits he filed were never about him or his company. They were filed on behalf of over 500,000 property owners in a single Texas county. This is about the average person, the forgotten man and woman whose equity has been systematically stripped from their homes without their knowledge. The national press has to pick up on this story.
The entities responsible, the banks, the school districts, the government officials, are all going to have to sit down at the same table and figure out how to dismantle this bomb, piece by piece, in a controlled demolition. Because the alternative is just straight-up catastrophic demolition for us all. I hope this story has been eye-opening. If you found this information valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. It helps us continue to bring important stories like this to light.